Is there a supplemental agenda?
No, there is not.
Disclosure of pecuniary interest, direct or indirect, for open session agenda items and the general nature thereof. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Worship. Item 13D, which is municipal, well, maybe it's not. I'm not sure whether that includes the items that were discussed in camera with respect to litigation. And if not, then it'll simply be the in-camera report when it comes back, as I declared it earlier.
Mr. Norton, just confirm, please.
Mr. Mayor, I think this is the report for renewal of the insurance policy, so I don't think we're discussing any of the actual files.
As long as there's no discussion on that, I just can't tell that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Latimer.
I have an indirect conflict with regard to 13C, application for site plan control, Howell Holdings.
Thank you, Council. We have one deputation this evening for items on the current agenda. Would Deborah Olinsky be in? Is Deborah present? There are no deputations.
Okay, consent agenda. Do I have approval for the one consent agenda item? Councillor Foss, seconded by Councillor Finn. Would anybody like to pull this out and talk about it? All right. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Notices of motion. Seeing none. Item 12, tender awards.
Item 12.8, Talbot Trail Temporary Options and Request for Proposal Award, RFP R19-374, Talbot Trail Municipal Class Environmental Assessment, Community Romney.
Councillor Harrigan.
I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Oche.
I'll second.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it. Oh, sorry. Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions around one of the options around concession line 2, and then some related safety questions about that. So first, I guess, before I kind of go into those questions, can you share what the timing of doing the environmental assessment would be, and then what the public could expect would be an outcome from that assessment, just so that people watching in the community have an understanding of what the recommendation is?
Of course. Thank you, Mark. So the recommendation reports proceed with municipal class EA. The process will be approximately a year long to complete. It will include at a minimum of two public meetings with the public to evaluate and all of the different options for both short-term and long-term before making a recommendation about what the best recommendation is for Talbot Trail. And that will likely, that recommendation will come forward in the fall for then Council's consideration.
And some of the other potential options that are shared in the report, local improvements, paving different roads, et cetera, even if those took place, we would still need to really do this environmental assessment to have the best information possible to look at the long-term solutions, correct?
That is correct, yes. So the EA is to identify solutions for the long-term improvement of Talbot Trail. All the other options in the report are means that we could do within the road allowances that we currently own that do not trigger the EA process. So things we can do immediately.
Okay. So I wasn't able to attend the shoreline meetings, but I do know there was a group of concerned citizens who reside kind of in the Talbot Trail area and around the thruway. And the second concession, which you've noted in your report, has kind of become like a local detour route. There is concern about maintenance and winter maintenance of that road and how it's going to be treated and what the traffic implications would be for that. So can you share kind of what the current state is or what they can expect for the winter time, assuming there's a big snowstorm or something along that area, in that area?
Thank you, Mayor. So with respect to Concession Road 2, we have been continually keeping an extra close eye on this road. to ensure that it is up to safety standard. With respect to winter control, it currently falls under a Class 4 road, which means that the MMS requirement is 8 centimeters within 16 hours. So that's what we plan to meet.
Okay. And if residents have any concerns, safety, winter maintenance, any issues, they would leverage current processes, so calling 360-1998 or the police traffic control line if they would like to report any issues. Is that correct? That all
That's
stays the
correct.
same?
Or they can also email ckinfo@chatham-kent.ca.
Okay, thank you. So happy to support the recommendation. I just wanted to bring some questions forward because as with any of the issues that we've experienced along the shoreline, the local residents are really feeling impacted. And so thank you to the staff for being responsive to the calls and the concerns that have come in. And this is something that I know as a Councillor Mark or Councillor Oche and myself will be monitoring closely in terms of the experience over the winter months, because we really aren't sure of what the impact is going to be as we get those first snowstorms to the traffic on the second concession. So that was all. Thank you.
Councillor Oche, followed by Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. Chris, I've had this question asked to me, so I don't know the answer. We're using concession 2 because it's the closest to the lake, because people were asking me, concession 3 is already stone chipped from Coatsworth going west, and a small portion of it is tar and chip, going from Coatsworth Road to Stevenson Road. So they're wondering why we're not just going to carry on with stone and chip on concession 3 instead of doing everything that would have to be done at concession 2.
Thank you, Mayor Camp. So as I understand, both concession line 2 and concession line 3 are I believe they're both gravel roads between Coatsworth and Stevenson. I have to verify if they are in fact have been upgraded to a tar and chip surface. But I believe they're being maintained currently as gravel roads. Both of them.
There's probably, I don't know if it'll be 500 feet or more, maybe a little more. That is tar and chip on 3. I'm going towards Stevenson Road from Coatsworth, like when you first turn on and go up, there's a little more houses there in that area that is actually tar and chip, and then the rest is gravel. So someone was just asking me, why wouldn't we just carry that on? But that's why I was asking.
If there was a decision made in the past as to why that stretch of road was put to a hard surface, tar and chip or asphalt, I can't comment on with me right now as to why that decision was made. But I do know that with our current policy in place for road upgrades, to proceed with doing a local improvement for a road upgrade, that would be the recommendation to upgrade concession line 3 or 2 going forward, should the residents and the everyone that fronts that road want to proceed that way.
I'm just, I guess one of the questions I have is that there's only 2 people on concession 2, so obviously I would say there's at least 10 on concession 3, so that's why one of the questions obviously we spread out among, but for the whatever we are thinking of doing in the future, which I believe was using concession 2 to get around from now on, like once the project comes up, and if it's ever taken place, or when it does take place, I should say, that's why I'm just wondering why we would go to 2 instead of 3 when we already have part of it finished, I guess.
I can comment that the recommendation for the detour route for local traffic is not using technically any of those roads. That's just become the road that everyone's using because it's closest. It is the shortest path around the actual failure site. The recommendation for the detour route that engineering recommended was to go up Stevenson and Coatsworth all the way to Middle Line to get around the site, because those are the actual paved roads that can accommodate that level of traffic.
Through your worship, my one last question is, I noticed, and I honestly can't remember if it's this one or it's farther back in, where we're talking about fixing up concession 2, or actually, I'm sorry, no, the actual option 1 or 2, but we still don't want trucks on it. So are we legally, other than maybe a load limit, is that the only way we can keep trucks off it, by load limiting the like, if we do that?
So
quick
right
fix.
now with the road closed, obviously it's restricted to all traffic, and
Right.
we're relying on our police enforcement to assist with the restrictions of traffic on the road, all forms of traffic. But if we do proceed with one of the options identified in this report, which still cuts back any truck traffic, it will be through signage and engagement with CK Police to make sure that trucks are still staying off of that stretch of road.
So load limit or no trucks, period?
Essentially, it will be identified as like a low limit, like a Class B type of road that restricts large truck traffic. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Scotchy?
Thank you, through your worship. Chris and Thomas, I really appreciate the time that you guys made available last week for the shoreline study. I know a lot of your team members stayed late to answer questions and were very active, engaged with the residents, so I greatly appreciate that. I guess I just want some clerical questions. Is obviously the amount for this assessment is quite substantial, and we have obviously a lot of shoreline issues. So what has to take place for an EA study to become prevalent that we have to do it? So is this something that we're going to have to do on all these roads that are having some erosion? Because obviously the cost is astronomical, and I'm going to support this because of the fact that it's really impacted Ward 2 as well. But is this something that we're going to have to basically do in this assessment on every single section of road? Because this is 650 meters, is that correct? That's what this was, 650 meters in this section here?
Thank you, Mayor Canf. Now, the section of road between Coatsworth and Stevenson, I can't recall. I know the actual failure section is about 150 meters to about 300 meters. But really what the EA is going to be looking at ultimately is almost like a 30-kilometer stretch swath around the failure location. It's going to be looking at making recommendations for future alignments of Talbot Trail, much greater than just the impacted zone.
Okay, so I'm glad that I asked that question because I read this otherwise. I thought this was just actually doing an assessment on the impacted area. So this is a wider spread. So I was just thinking if this is for like 650 meters of an assessment, that's astronomical. But this is in fact that whole section then of Talbot Trail then. So 30 kilometers, you're saying.
The scope of the RFP brought, we basically high level identified the start of the scope to be where Talbot Trail transitions to the south. I think right at concession line 2 actually, right up to beyond Port Road. So it's quite a span of where we're telling them to kind of look for the best recommended solution for the future Talbot Trail.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just add, I think your question is a larger one too, and you're looking at all of the regions along the lake.
Correct.
And as you may recall, on Tuesday, we subdivided up the areas into 4 different regions. And most likely, first of all, we're going to come back to council in March. We're taking all of the input from the public. We had a detailed list of the options available, the estimated costs, the pros and cons of each. We're taking all that customer and resident input, and we're going to come up with a report. We're going to give it to council for you to decide what the next steps are. And some of those next steps, this one we think is very logical, is an EA, but we may come up with other solutions for those other areas, but we will chunk it out. It won't be, I don't expect more than 4 EAs, but again, that'll be up to council to move forward with.
Thank you. That was basically my question. How many times are we going to see different EAs for different aspects? Because obviously those costs are pretty extraordinary. So I appreciate that. And once again, thanks to your team for attending both those and engaging with the residents so much. Thank you.
Councillor Pinsino?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Chris. I'm going to support this because it is the right thing to do. I guess my question is, we're going to do all this tar and chipping down there, and how does that differ from what we wanted at Rosa Beach line?
Thank you, Mayor Canf. So under this report with the recommendation to proceed with the municipal class EA, we're not recommending any tar and chipping to any roads. That was just an option identified as requested by council to include in this report. So it's not an actual recommendation.
Okay. So if we're going that route, and when you're doing your EA, Rosa Beach line will be part of that assessment, correct?
The recommendation for Rose Beach Line, that is a separate EA process that was already initiated and is currently on hold. We're going to wait until the outcome of the, it got to a certain point in its stage where now it's reliant on the outcome of the shoreline study. So once the shoreline study is complete, we're going to then reopen that EA, which therefore may expand the scope of that EA so that we're not doing so many EAs within that corridor. And we might have to look at now the bigger picture, now that we're going to know what that bigger picture is pertaining to Rose Beach Line.
Okay, that's perfect. I just want to make sure every area is getting the same treatment here. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much. I just want to echo Councillor Sakachi's comments, and I'm glad he asked a question in regards to the length of the EA. I've been up and down that road a fair bit over the weekend talking to residents, and in every single backyard there are those or those rotational failures, those cracks and that sloughing off. And in some sections, even in Ward 2, the lake is within 150, 200 feet of the roadway. And I just want to, and I know he asked, but I just want my own concerns put at ease there. So that, and you said there's going to be like 4 EAs or whatever the number is, but they're all going to allow for each other, right? Like I'd hate to see one EA done, say, in this area that doesn't give consideration to at least the potential of what the other EAs are going to say, because I would hate to see us do any sort of work in any area, we'll say this one, and then we have to close it at the AD Shad, and then we don't allow for each other. So can you kind of put my heart at ease?
Thank you, Mayor. So that's exactly intent. So if you want to look at it like this, the report you're going to have in March is the overriding report. It's going to give us the global perspective of everything that are the options and what's available. And then from there, we're going to take that information, and not every region is the same solution. So we're going to then specify through EAs. We have 2 in process. If you approve this one tonight, we already have 2. One is along Rose Beach Line. This will be the second one. The other ones will come potentially at Rondo and Erie Shore Drive as well. So that's kind of the next step. We wanted to get ahead of the game, be proactive on this one, but we as an engineering group will ensure that we're all talking to each other, and we're not going to do something separate from the other. They've just been segmented out based on the topography, really, that's out there. So, for example, Talbot Trail has definitely a topography of bluffs, right? That's quite different from Erie Shore Drive. So we're just taking it a step at a time, but the information you're going to see in March is really, really important, and that's going to be really the driving force behind all of them.
Right, okay, that doesn't quite answer it, because maybe I'm having a hard time getting across what I'm trying to say. I guess what my concern is if this comes back and says we should move the road 200 meters, okay. And then in 4 years we have to close the road at 80 Shad because it's eroded away, and then we do that EA and it says, no, we should close the rest of Talbot. That concerns me.
Well, it's definitely not the intent. The intent is that whatever we come up with, it's going to be an integrated strategy for that entire shoreline.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And again, I want to say thank you to everybody else who came out to the shoreline meetings. Councillor Wright, Councillor Finn, and Councillor Kirkwood White, along with the South Can councillors, and staff too. I heard nothing but good things from the people after the meeting, so thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 12B, T19-52, tender award snow clearing and de-icing of various parking areas across Chatham-Kent.
Councillor Wright.
Mayor Caniff, I've got to declare a conflict on this one.
Okay. Councillor Pinsino.
I'll move it, Your Worship.
Councillor Kirkwood White. Any questions?
Point of order. I have to declare a conflict on this one, too.
Okay. Dropping like flies here. Any questions of the remaining ones? Yes, Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess my question is the pricing compared to other years, is it similar or is it more or less?
Thank you, Your Worship. The prices are higher this time around. The packages are also a little different. We didn't have the same groupings because we had no bids in some of the previous packages. So we did a lot of combining, but overall with the increased assault and labor and fuel, they did come in higher.
Okay, but not significantly, just to compensate for the extra price in fuel and salt, basically?
I don't have a percentage with me
Okay,
tonight.
no, that's fine, yeah. I guess I look at them and they're one time based on each time they do it. That's what that price is based on. But the areas must be significant in size, though, I suppose, as well.
Within each package, again, Your Worship, thank you, there are different size lots. We have added properties that were missed the last time, so the pricings aren't quite apples to apples comparisons.
Okay. All right, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Sakachi?
I'm not really sure if you can help me with this one here. This kind of just brings a question to the floor that I've had recently. Is there any time that we're going to start looking at these properties that we take care of? I've heard of many maintenance issues in regards to some parking lots in Blenheim. It's basically like three-party ownership. So basically, we take care of them. Somebody else owns part of them. Somebody else owns the other part. And when there's an issue at these properties, it's like trying to find out who's actually going to rectify these issues. So these pre-amalgamation properties, for instance, like in Blenheim, that are having drainage issues in that, is there a way that we can clean these up? Would that have to come from a motion in regards to, for voting in regards to trying to, establish a way to find these parking lots, isolate them, and then try to rectify them in regards to ownership instead of having all these partnerships that, and nobody can really do anything because it's nobody's property technically?
Thank you, Mayor. The situation you describe is very rare, too. We don't have a lot of those situations, but I know which one you're referring to. And in order to make that happen, we need to have three willing parties. And it hasn't been a perfect solution so far, but it still works. I would recommend that if that is something you would like us to pursue, we can reach out to those groups. Right now, we have agreements in place. Sometimes they're just a handshake agreement as well. But we don't have that situation that much within Chatham-Kent. It's primarily within the Blenheim area that we have that issue, and I know which one you're referring to.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm saying is because there's been drainage issues in the past, and when the municipality is talked to, it's basically, they say, and this, my concern is in the wintertime when the ice is starting to form, they're trying to fix some drainage aspects and they can't proceed with work because it's technically not municipal property and the municipality doesn't. So I guess it's something that maybe I'll have a conversation with you in the future to see if it's something that I can do on my perspective in regards to bringing something forward. But I would like to see it so, there's service to a proper level that we do have some clarification there. So it's just an opportunity to touch base on that briefly. Thank you.
Councillor C. McGregor, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Thank you. Thank you, and through the mayor. I'm just curious, is this the only report we'll have coming to us for snow clearing and de-icing at various locations? And the reason I ask is we have Chatham downtown, Chatham outlying areas north, Chatham outlying areas south. What about Chatham proper other than the downtown core? Is that included in the north and south areas, or is that is there a separate contract out there in negotiation stage or something?
Are there specific parking lots downtown? The buildings that are represented in this report are part of the municipal owned properties. Any agreements that are with private parking lots that some of the public works also clear are not part of this.
Okay, and I wasn't referring to private lots. Is there no other private lots in Chatham other than the downtown core? Just because we have Wallaceburg listed here, Tilbury, Blenheim. It seemed funny to me, and it's nothing. I don't even go there, but it just seemed funny that there was Chatham downtown, and then there's outlying areas north, outlying south, but there must be other municipal parking areas other than just in the downtown core of Chatham. Or not. Maybe there's not.
We did verify with all departments that have properties, the
So
PUC,
there's not.
social housing. This is supposed to be the comprehensive list, so there
Okay.
should be no other.
I was just surprised when I read it. I thought, I think we're missing something big here. It's okay, thank you.
Councillor Latimer?
Thank you through the mayor. Viewing the issues over the past year with our grass cutting contractors, I'm assuming that there's a process in place here with our contractors if there's a problem with frequency or quality of service.
Thank you, Your Worship. The managers of the areas and the supervisors of the different buildings work directly with the contractors themselves.
Okay.
So as an example, the PUC and social housing will let out their own POs, and they're the ones that contact their vendors that are on this list. So the contracts will be with those managers to mitigate any issues.
Thank you for the clarification.
And if we've missed anything, we did maps and comprehensive lists to all of the management in all of the areas. But once in a while, something pops up, so you have the right to add it or remove it as part of the terms of the agreement.
All right. Thank you for the clarification.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0.
Item 12C, janitorial services contract extension, Chatham Courthouse.
Councillor Crew?
I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Scotchy?
Be happy to second that, Your Worship.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 13, community development.
Item 13A, municipal comprehensive review, phase 1 report for our 25-year growth forecast, land supply, and land needs analysis. Your Worship, we have a presentation by Jamie Cook from Watson and Associates, and I believe Bruce is going to do a short introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So just very briefly here, I'd just like to introduce the 2019 Comprehensive Review. Some people have asked me, what is the real point of this study in the first place? So back in, I think it was January, we brought a report to start into the next official plan review process for the municipality. Last time we did it was 2012, 2013. It was approved by the ministry in 2015. So the first piece of that is provincial policy requires us to have a look at our long-range forecast for population, for growth. The reason they require us to do that is so we have a good, sound understanding of how much land do we really need to accommodate growth, whether it be residential or non-residential uses, i.e. commercial or industrial lands, and what should we be planning for over the long term in terms of our land needs. So that is the reason for this report. It really looks at our forecasts, our population, our housing needs, and our employment land needs. With that, I'm going to introduce Jamie Cook from Watson and Associates. He's a land use planner and an economist. Watson did the same study for us back in 2012, so they're very familiar with the data, and it was logical to re-engage them again to do this update for us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to kind of walk through an overview of the report and hit the high points, and then we'll open it up to any questions. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Bruce, and good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff, and members of the public. It's a pleasure to be before you to summarize the findings of our comprehensive review study. So as Bruce mentioned, this is a really critical document as a background to long-term land use planning and land needs within Chatham-Kent, but it's also a critical foundation document to other supporting documents and studies that look at long-term growth projections, studies like master planning studies, your development charges background study, for example, and a range of other studies that would rely on this kind of work. So I'm going to dive right into the forecast approach. So this schematic just briefly outlines the approach to long-term growth projections more broadly, and the forecast approach we use in Chatham-Kent. So it's critical to recognize that the long-term economic and population outlook for Chatham-Kent is largely tied to the broader economic potential and competitiveness of the broader region, which largely comprises the commuter shed of Chatham-Kent and even further beyond. So that's really where we started in terms of looking at macroeconomic trends provincially and regionally, looking at economic drivers of growth and labor force growth potential ultimately within the Chatham-Kent area. Labor force is a critical driver of net migration, and labor force and employment ultimately then really forms the background and backbone of the migration and ultimately the population forecasts. So that's the left side of the model. And then moving right, once we've identified future migration trends, as well as trends in natural increase. So natural increase is really just a way of referring to the amount of births, less deaths. So it's the vital statistics and demographic trends within Chatham. Those two items are put together to then form a population forecast by age. That forecast by age then allows us to look at the needs of the population by age and what its needs are for household formation. Once we have that housing forecast, then we looked at housing trends by structure type, and then provided an allocation of population growth by all the primary urban centers within Chatham-Kent, as well as the secondary urban centers and the remaining rural area. So I just want to provide a little bit of a brief overview of some of the economic trends within Chatham-Kent. This is an historical profile of labor force data within the Chatham-Kent area since 2001. A couple interesting points to note here is that you can see the 2008-9 period was the start of a downward trend in labor force growth. As well, during that same time, the unemployment rate spiked both in Chatham-Kent as well at the province, across the province as a whole. This was as a result of the economic downturn, as a result of the financial crisis in 2008 and 9. But you can see since that time, the unemployment rate steadily come down. It's come down quite steeply in the last 3 years, from 2016 to 18, to about 4.4%. At the same time, labor force is starting to grow again, and we've added about 1,000 labor force since 2016. So while that's a good news story, it's also important to recognize that the labor force potential is potentially becoming constrained with this lower rate of labor force unemployment. So efforts will be needed to ensure that that Chatham-Kent's attracting new labor to the municipality in the forecast. One of the issues that we stress in our report is the linkage between housing opportunities by type and tenure and the ability to attract labor to the region. So those are a very inextricably linked factors. This is a summary of the forecast by major sector or subsector within Chatham-Kent since 2011 up to 2018, based on available data from other sources other than StatsCan, because the StatsCan data doesn't come out until 2021. It's interesting to note here that the economy is rebounding, has been rebounding quite strongly in Chatham-Kent, and more broadly within the more macro region of Southern Ontario. But you can see that a lot of that job growth that's occurred in recent years has been in more knowledge-based sectors in the service sector economy, as well as some opportunities in utilities. We see opportunities in information and culture, arts and entertainment, public admin, healthcare, accommodation and food services. It's also important to note that the manufacturing sector is also showing signs of recovery, and for the first time in a while, since we've been looking at Chatham-Kent's manufacturing sector, is actually starting to show signs of growth between this 2011 and 18 period. I also just wanted to provide an overview of building permit activity over the last 15 years or so. you can see, similar to some of the economic data, prior to the economic downturn in 2008-9, we saw stronger rates of building permit activity, averaging well above 200 new units per year. So this is building permits issued for new households or new dwellings, not including any additions or improvements. But after the downturn in 2008-9, building permit activity did slow down a bit, but it is starting to pick up again, averaging around just over about 140 a year in the last couple of years. We expect, based on our discussions with staff and looking at what's in the development pipeline, that average will be well above 200, or at least above 200 units per year over the next 5 years. So I wanted to dive right into the forecast trends. So this is a graph that shows the components of population growth. And so there's really only two major components to population growth. As I mentioned, there's net migration. Net migration can come in three primary types: international migration, interprovincial migration, so migration from other parts of the country into Chatham, and then intra-provincial migration, so migration from other parts of Ontario to Chatham. You can see historically there was a lot of out-migration between 2006 and 11, which was a major cause of the decline in population during that period. We're now starting to see the migration numbers looking more positive between 2016 and 21. These numbers are largely positive as a result of intra-provincial migration and inter-provincial migration, as I mentioned earlier. And to a lesser extent, some activity related to international migration. We're also seeing an increase in the amount of non-permanent residents that are also coming to Chatham. So those could be those that are working on permanent or temporary work permits, or students, typically international students. We're projecting the amount of net migration to remain strong in Chatham-Kent over the forecast period. But what's bringing down the population growth rate is largely the natural increase, the light blue color there that you see. That's the amount of births minus the amount of deaths. And there's more deaths projected to occur than births over the forecast period, largely as a result of the aging of the population. This isn't a unique factor to Chatham-Kent. It's a rather general trend that's affecting pretty much all areas of Ontario and Canada and most of the Western world. But it is impacting certain areas stronger, where the base of population of 55 plus is higher relative to some other communities. So with that said, this is a projection of the population forecast. This is a long-term projection over the next 30 years for Chatham-Kent. One thing I want to point out before we get into the details of this forecast is that the population forecast includes what we call a census undercount. So the undercount is essentially the net amount of people that are missed during census enumeration. So the census numerator goes around, invariably misses some people, understates the population in some areas, in some cases overstates, but the net impact is an underrepresentation of about 2.7%. Those are the final numbers that came out just this year for Chatham-Kent of what that missed amount of population is. So that brings your 2016 population from 102,000 to about 104,800. So it doesn't necessarily represent growth, it just represents the amount of people that are missed, that are added on. It's typically the way that the population is recorded in provincial forecasts and official forecasts like this, so we're including it in our numbers. Over the long-term period, we're projecting, after 25 years of gradual and steady population decline, a turnaround in the population forecast, growing from about 104,800 to about 108,900. So it's just over 4,000 people. It represents a very modest rate of growth, about 0.1% annually over that time period. Relative to other areas within the region, it's comparable to the growth rate in Lambton County, slightly higher than the growth rate for the city of Sarnia, but it is a bit lower than growth rates in some other areas, like the combined forecast for Essex County, for example, as well as Elgin County. And when I refer to these other forecasts, I'm either referring to forecasts that I've prepared or forecasts that have been prepared by the province. The Ministry of Finance does prepare forecast at the county level, including any separated municipalities, usually every year. The good news is that the forecasts that are being prepared by the Ministry of Finance have been going up over the last several years. Every time they prepare a new annual forecast, they tend to be more robust and stronger for this area and many other areas in Ontario. The other positive story here is that the census estimates for 2018 are also showing strong growth for Chatham as of 2018. While they are preliminary, it's good news for us to see that our forecasts are not alone in this rebound that we're projecting. This slide here provides a summary of the population age structure for Chatham-Kent over the long-term forecast period. Probably one of the most important things to notice here in this forecast is just what's happening in the 55 plus category. So you can see from 2001 to 2016, the population share of the 55 to 74 age group in the blue here and the sort of cyan color increased from about 18% to 26%, 27%. It's now showing a decline in the share of growth over the forecast period because moving forward, this population age cohort is now moving into the 75 plus age group. And so similar to a lot of municipalities in Ontario, your population is aging and the amount of 75 plus population will increase in both absolute numbers and in percentage terms. So from 2016 to 2046, the 75 plus population is projected to grow from 9% to 22%. So this is important because it has impacts on the rate of population growth. It also has impacts on housing needs for the community, as well as labor force trends over the long term. Looking at the other components of the population age structure, the general trend is that the population share will gradually decline in most other categories as a result of that shift into the 75 plus category. So you can see that happening in the, for example, in the 0 to 19 category, for example, it's decreasing from 22% to 19% as an example. This slide here is a summary of what we refer to as the average persons per unit. And this is another important statistic to understand when looking at long-term population trends and housing needs. And so when I spoke earlier about this relationship between population age structure and household formation, this is really the key graph that really summarizes this. So this is the average number of people that live in a household within Chatham-Kent and the trends that we've been seeing in those averages over the last 25 years and into the next 30 years. And so you can see that the average PPU has been declining from 2.75 to 2.36, and it's projected to decline more gradually, but still come down to 2.21 over the long term. Again, this is largely as a result of the aging of the population, primarily the baby boom population, but also being impacted by the aging of millennials and adult children leaving home and purchasing their own homes or getting into the housing rental market. This is an important stat to keep in mind because it does put downward pressure on population growth. And so even in areas where we may see positive housing activity, we may see relatively flat population or in some cases a declining population because of this declining PPU. So this is one factor to keep in mind and a variable to consider when looking at the long-term trends. If the PPUs don't come down as fast, that could put upward pressure or potential on the population. Conversely, if it comes down faster, it would put downward pressure. This is a summary of the housing forecast over the next 30 years, comparable to the or looking in comparison to the previous 25-year period. Overall, the projected housing activity is projected to grow from about 43,000, roughly 200, to about 47,900. That represents an average increase of about 158 households a year. Relative to what has been happening historically over the 25-year period, that's about a 22% increase from the 129 units per year average that was recorded by Statistics Canada. So we are projecting more robust growth with respect to housing going forward. largely as a result of that recovery in the broader and local economic forecast that I had previously mentioned. It's also important to mention that as a result of the aging of the population, we do expect to see a steady shift in the demand of housing by structure type. We expect to see more demand for medium and high density housing as a result of those demographic trends, but also pressures on housing affordability moving forward. We expect to see about 30% of the housing in new units being comprised of medium and high density households. This slide summarizes the employment forecast from 2016 to 2046. We're projecting the employment forecast, I should say. We're expecting the employment forecast to increase over that time from 39,500 to 43,000. That's an increase of about 3,500 jobs over that 30-year period. Quite a bit of that employment growth is projected to already have occurred over the last few years or continue to occur into the next 5-year period. We do expect 2016 to 21 to be a strong year, and it's reflected in the unemployment rate data that I provided earlier. The line in the lime green there is the employment activity rate. So that is just a fancy way of saying the ratio of jobs per population. Overall, Chatham-Kent has a fairly healthy ratio of jobs to population, but that activity rate did drop quite a bit between 2006 and 11 during the economic downturn. We are projecting that activity rate to rebound into 2021. However, it is hard for that activity rate to climb much more steeply than that because of the aging population, the aging labor force. It does put pressure on the ability of overall employment growth and the increase in that activity rate. This slide summarizes that employment forecast that I just showed you by major employment sector. So we looked at a number of subsectors more broadly, but specifically we did quantify the employment forecast by major employment sector, including industrial, commercial, institutional, primary, and then work at home. So work at home is not really a sector, it's more of a category of those who are working at home or operating home-based businesses. We are projecting that the employment forecast will be relatively well balanced between all ICI categories, the industrial component being quite strong at 35%. We expect to see employment growth in the industrial category in small to medium scale manufacturing, wholesale trade, logistics, food processing, utilities, construction. Those are some of the core sectors. The population-related component is really largely retail, non-retail, commercial uses, as well as multi-tenant office. Most of that population growth is largely driven by the population forecast itself. But again, we do expect to see quite a bit of growth in that category as well. Some growth related to the retail component as well as other knowledge-based sectors that I'd mentioned earlier, sectors like professional and scientific services, information and culture, arts and entertainment, for example, would fall into that category, as well as accommodation and food and other retail. And then the institutional sector is also projected to experience steady growth as well, largely in the health sector, to a lesser extent education, as well as public administration. We don't expect to see a lot of growth in the primary sector. Not to say that this sector is not a critical component, an important component of the economy. It's just not expected to be a heavy driver of employment. But we do anticipate some opportunities in the primary sector over the forecast period. And then lastly, work at home is projected to see steady employment growth, largely as a result of improvements in telecommunications and technology, and that overall shifting those structural changes in the economy towards a more service sector economy do lend themselves well to the work at home category. So this background analysis was primarily developed to prepare a long-term residential and non-residential needs forecast. So briefly, just to summarize, we looked at the municipality's supply and demand for residential land by urban center and primary and secondary urban center, as I mentioned. The municipality does have quite a bit of designated available vacant residential land supply, a total of about 717 hectares. Based on our forecast, looking at the amount of units that would be demanded over time in the urban areas and the density of those units, we're projecting a need of about 263 gross hectares. That leaves a surplus of about 450 gross hectares of land overall within Chatham-Kent. We looked individually at each of the urban centers, as I mentioned. Each one of those urban centers also does have a surplus. The Chatham Urban Center, for example, surplus is about 231 gross hectares. So the conclusion here is that there is more than enough designated land to accommodate urban development over the next 30, in this case, 25 years. We're limited by the provincial policy statement in terms of how far we can project out. Right now, we're limited to a 20-year period. The proposed provincial policy statement is looking to extend that to 25 years. So this is sort of the maximum amount of need that we would suggest be examined. Looking at the commercial land needs picture, we also prepared an analysis of long-term commercial lands. In this case, the focus was primarily on the Chatham urban area, given this is the area with most of the highest concentration of population growth and the greatest base for existing retail and future retail. We've identified a supply of about 33 hectares of retail lands, a demand of about 8 hectares, which translates into about 227,000 square feet of additional retail space. That leaves a surplus of about 24 hectares of commercial lands within the 25-year forecast period. So similar to the residential forecast, we are projecting there's enough commercial designated lands to accommodate growth over the next 25 years. So lastly, we looked at urban employment land needs. So employment lands are synonymous typically for industrial lands. Overall, we've identified a demand of about 124 net hectares compared to a supply of about 132 hectares. So when we look at the supply and the demand on a municipal-wide basis, they're relatively in relative equilibrium, but the issue here is that the supply and demand are not well aligned at the primary and largely at the primary urban center level. So what we find is that there are surpluses in some of the primary urban centers. For example, in Chatham, Tilbury, and other primary urban centers, we have identified surpluses. But in other areas, like the Chatham Bloomfield Business Park, we're identifying a shortfall of 42 hectares. Wellsburg, a shortfall of 10 hectares. And then in the secondary urban centers, a small shortfall of about 5 gross hectares for a total of about 57 gross hectares. So overall, we've identified that there will be a need to look at designating more employment land or industrial land through the next official plan review and update to accommodate this long-term need that we've identified. So just a few conclusions to finalize my presentation tonight. We found it interesting to see that after a decade of negative growth, Chatham-Kent's population is now experiencing a modest increase, and these trends are anticipated to continue as the regional economy continues to expand. So we do expect to see this positive trend increasing in the near term. But it's also important to note that Chatham-Kent's population labor force is aging, and that aging puts downward pressure on the long-term population and employment growth rates for Chatham-Kent as a whole. And so it's difficult for Chatham-Kent to experience a more rapid growth rate in this context. I would say a more stronger rate of growth would be somewhere between 1% annual growth and above, and it's very hard to experience that in a situation with such an aging population and negative decrease in that natural component for growth that I mentioned. As I mentioned, the population is growing and it's also diversifying, and so as a result, we would expect that the needs for housing will also diversify by housing type and by housing tenure. So with respect to the urban land needs analysis, we identified that there is more than a sufficient amount of designated urban land to accommodate growth over the next 20 to 25 years. Most of the supply right now is provided within urban centers is primarily low density development, and most of that development does limit market choice and restricts more multi-unit development type options for growth. We also identified that while it wasn't a focus of our study, that there is moderate growth pressure in the rural areas, specifically along the Lake Erie shoreline communities, and these areas are also expected to experience moderate growth pressure over the forecast period. With respect to the non-residential forecast, as I mentioned, we identified there's more than enough commercial land need or commercial lands, but there is a shortfall of industrial, or what we call employment lands. About 57 gross hectares would be required to accommodate this need over the 25-year period. There's also a need for additional rural lands to be looked at for industrial outside of urban areas. So our focus is primarily in the urban areas, but there's also a need to ensure there's enough dry industrial land to accommodate industry that doesn't require full municipal servicing. And we've identified a need of about 42 gross hectares, 17 gross hectares or 42 gross acres in the rural area. That concludes the presentation. I did want to mention that in closing that the forecast that we provided is a scenario. It's intended to represent the reference of the most likely scenario for growth. There are other scenarios that could be looked at, including high and low ranges. I think ultimately there is a reasonable range of growth that we would project. Looking back at some of the forecasts that we've prepared, we're typically in the range of less than 1% to about 5% in terms of our accuracy, in terms of how close that we can be to a near-term forecast over the next 5 to 10 years. So I would suggest that's probably a reasonable range. Your ability to grow higher really would, largely depend on two things: the continued trends in the macro economy and what happens more broadly. Those issues are more out of your control to some extent, but what is in your control is what you can do locally. And so the investment decisions that you make, where you designate and service lands, and the various programs and the programming that you provide will all, I think, go a long way to ensuring that this forecast can be as positive as possible. That concludes my presentation. Happy to take any comments.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Hi, thank you again for your presentation. Some of my questions you're going to find a bit repetitive from the Community Development Advisory Committee meeting where we saw a bit of a preview of this. So first, thank you for all of your hard work. I find every time I look at the extensive report that you provide, I can hone in on something a bit different, and then a list of questions kind of prevails. So the first question that I have is around the population projections. You showed a graph in your presentation projecting about a 0.1% annually, but you initially also noted about the local and regional economic outlooks. So how would something like a recession impact the 0.1%? Because we had a conversation, I know, at CDAC around the impact of recessions, and I just think it's important for the general public to understand where that fits into your projections.
Yes, that's a great question, and maybe I'll just go back to the slide that shows the population forecast, just so you have some context. So there's the forecast there. So I think it's important to note that as a land economist and as an urban planner, I'm not able to predict exactly what the timing is of recessions. If many of you are probably listening to some of the broader news networks out there about predicting downturns, and that forecast for a downturn seems to get sort of put off. Last year was going to be 2019 and then 2020, and it looks like it's getting maybe put off till sometime in the near future. I think it's important to recognize that it's been a long time since we had a downturn. We talked a bit about this in committee. It's been 10 years now since we've had an economic downturn. It's important to recognize that my forecast is more conceptual, so I can't predict strong boom times or downturns with precision. So it's a more conceptual, smooth forecast. When you look at the historical patterns in comparison, it's much more erratic and sort of irregular in terms of the rate of growth. So there's ups and downs. So I would say that a downturn, if we have one, it's not likely we're going to see a major one happening sometime before the end of 2020 at the earliest, but we don't know. If we do see one at that point, it likely won't. A lot of it won't be embraced in the 21 numbers yet, so we won't probably see that until 2026. So we could see possibly a higher forecast in 2021 and something slightly lower than what I have in 26. That could be one scenario, but it is really quite difficult to really pinpoint that. It's one of the reasons why we do have an official plan review process, and we will, come back. The municipality will come back and look at this, within a 5 or slightly longer time period. So obviously, this forecast is looking at 30 years, but will be revisited well before that.
Okay, thank you. The second question I have is actually around employment. And it may be more for Stuart or somebody in the ECDEV group. You showed the graph about where employment was changing, so primary, work at home, industrial. But there was another part of the the report that really caught my attention around the allocation of employment growth by primary and secondary urban centers. Page 146 on the report, if anybody has it in front of them. And I noticed that there's a couple primary urban centers, namely Dresden and Ridgetown, that are identified as having a 0 employment growth allocation, and then others are quite small, so Wheatley 2%, Tilbury 2%, Wallaceburg 3%, and then Chatham 52%. And so my question for folks in ECDEV is we've just really realigned how we're doing economic development with this idea of focusing regionally on small businesses so that our smaller towns can grow. Do you see that as kind of trying to combat what's the projections are on the plan, or is that something we're going to have to respond to? Like if Chatham's going to grow by 52%, should we put more resources in that community, or is that actually doing a disservice to our smaller communities? What's that dynamic there between ECDEV and how the economic development officers are responding to entrepreneurialism or potential growth in communities versus what the official plan is saying? Long-winded question, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I appreciate the easy question. Our realignment of staff is truly to make sure that we have people that are there to take to help the companies that are here today, the companies that aren't here yet, and those aspiring young entrepreneurs that are trying to figure out whether they want to get into it. So it's the coaching, the mentoring, and so on and so forth. I took a look at that, and I have to tell you that some of the companies that we're talking to in the outlying area are telling us that they're having challenges getting employment or employees, similar to some in Chatham as well, but some of the challenges are transportation, getting from here to there, and so on and so forth. As you've probably heard, sometimes we talk about, well, what does that mean? Well, we need to grow. You know what I mean? We need more houses, we need more people, we need more migration, and we're doing our best to try and set ourselves up for that future. Right, so that these businesses inside of these other communities, maybe the transportation system will be able to solve that problem into the future. We'll have housing to invite people into our community, so we have more people to take advantage of the jobs that are available throughout Chatham-Kent. We do not promote one community over the other. We have a great menu of communities, and we promote them all equally. So, but it's to say that it isn't more challenging in the outlying areas would not be correct. We do hear more in the outlying areas that the challenges are, we just don't have the housing builds happening in smaller communities for the people to come in and the ability for people to get to the jobs that we do. So a lot of the companies that are coming to us are looking to get close to where the employment level is, employees are, and get close to where the amenities are, the transportation, so on and so forth. So I hope I've answered your question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think, for myself, not being a planner by background, I see some of the graphs here as being a bit of a challenge, right? Like, oh, well, we can certainly prove them wrong, and Dresden can start some businesses and some employment tenure, and by 2046, maybe they have 3 or 4%. But that maybe is just the more competitive person in me speaking out. I think a copy of this report, it would be valuable for the BIAs to have it and to see it, because I think that, you know, within communities, those BIA groups are the ones that are really embracing how they can welcome other businesses from an employment perspective. Obviously, industry is another sector, but some of the graphs that I saw in this report, I think, would be valuable for our local communities to really see and digest, and see if they can come up with also, you know, strategies or action plans to work with Stuart's team to help us to grow in our industry and our employment. So, thank you. That's all for me.
Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is related. In the report, 219 pages, and for the benefit of those who haven't had a chance to read it and are maybe listening in, there's a reference to primary urban centers and secondary centers. And if you could just remind folks, who are the primary urban centers?
So I don't have the page numbers, but that you have. But I'll just give you the primary urban centers. So they are Blenheim, Chatham, Dresden, Ridgetown, Tilbury, Wellsburg, and Wheatley.
Councillor Crew, followed by Councillor Oche.
Thank you. One of the things that, through all your graphs and everything, that stood out to me was the aging population as we get to 2046. I'm not quite sure how old I'll be, if I'll be around, but I think that it's really interesting that, you know, I'm on the age-friendly committee, and it's more important, and this proves that our population is going to age, and we're going to have a larger demographic of older people who have housing needs that are specific to their lifestyles, and communities that they can get around in and things like that. So this is a good planning tool for that. One of the things that really stood out too is, you know, a lot of us went through that recession with job loss and everything. And Councillor Sakachi whispered, you know, 10 years we dropped, and it's been 10 years. And it's a slow recovery, and we're still not back where we were. So we still have a lot to do, but it's an interesting tool to use to plan for our future. And with the age-friendly, and as some of us age and work towards some of those priorities, the age-friendly, the priority is housing, and no different than anyone else here in the room for whatever reason. But this really supports that need. That we need to build our community for older folks, and it'll be valuable for younger folks as well. So thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Councillor Oche, followed by Councillor Hall.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. Just a question. I couldn't find it in the report at all. Do you have the numbers of, say, industrial property that's ready to go, has gas, water, sanitary, or anything like that in that report?
That's a great question. I may have to take a look through here to see if we did provide this sort of shovel-ready amount of supply. I don't have it offhand. I'm not sure if Stuart has it offhand. I don't want to
5-32. Section 5-32, I think, is where
was
you're
it
going.
there? 532 is not the employment section, though, so it's my residential. Do you have a...
No, but I can speak to it.
Okay. Sorry, I don't have that stat in my head right now.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in terms of all the land that's specific to what is shovel-ready, I would suggest we have very little that's actually completely shovel-ready, right? We have a lot of land that's well set up. There might be some infrastructure that's still required to be installed, whether it be municipal infrastructure or private utility infrastructure, i.e. gas or fiber or whatever it might be. But that is really a major component of the next exercise, or next piece of this exercise. That is to really take a hard look at Jamie's report identifies we do have a need for further industrial lands over the long term. Where's the best place that we should allocate those lands in terms of how can they be serviced, location, and the ability to maximize on those lands. So we certainly do have some. Bloomfield Business Park is relatively shovel-ready. Other lands in Chatham and some of our other communities as well. But we certainly have some that are deficient of infrastructure, and that's a challenge we have as well.
To your worship, how many acres do we have in Bloomfield left? Not very many, I don't believe.
25-ish, about 20, 25. That's not committed, Stuart. Yeah, we have about 20, 25. They're not shovel ready. That is the extension of Prosperity Way that has to take place for those.
Since I'm asking Ward 1, do you know what's there? We're saying that we have 15 extra in Tilbury right now, but I don't know. Is any of it shovel ready in Tilbury? No.
No, in Tilbury we have quite a bit of land that's designated. Some of it still needs infrastructure for sure.
Okay, and I'm assuming the same with Wheatley?
Wheatley, yes. Yeah. Especially on the south end. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. And thank you for the presentation. Again, Jamie, as Councillor Harrigan said earlier, our Community Development Advisory Committee had the chance to hear Jamie's presentation last month. We had some good discussion and good questions. I just wanted to share a couple of those questions that were asked. I thought they would, same as Councillor Harrigan, I thought it would be good to ask here in open session with all of Council. So you talked about growth rate a bit tonight. Jamie, what would a healthy growth rate be for sustainability for Chatham County?
It's an interesting question. I don't think there's a magic number of what that growth rate has to be. I think you definitely you would want to see enough housing to support a sustainable population and at least you wouldn't want any further decline in population for sure. When I look across the province, the growth rates really do vary. So when we look at rates, the provincial rate of growth has been around 1% annually over the last, say, 15 to 20 years, and it's projected to be about just over 1% annually over the next about 30 years. But it's also important to note that number gets skewed to some extent by the larger urban areas within Ontario. So the Greater Toronto Area and the bigger urban areas within the Greater Golden Horseshoe really do skew that number up quite a bit. And also in other areas of the province like Ottawa, that number is a bit higher. Outside of the GTA, or GGH, I should say, most areas are not growing at 1%. Most are somewhere between about 0.2 and maybe 0.7 or something. So if you could, I think, strive to be in that sort of, I think realistically, if you could strive to be in that 0.2 to say 0.5% range, I think that would be quite a positive, range of growth to strive for, as opposed to the more likely scenario that we're projecting at 0.1.
And just another question stemming from our meeting last month. Looking at some of the projections, it looks like there's an increase in migration versus some of the natural growth. So is it mostly older people coming and migrating here, or is it younger people, or is it a mixture?
Well, with respect to that natural decrease, that really is a result of the existing population base. So that decrease in the natural increase is not a result of migration. It's a result of the people that are living here aging and getting older. With respect to the migration by type, we would expect to see the migration relatively well balanced. There's opportunities in the 55 plus category, 55 to 74, I think. You're seeing attraction from other parts of Ontario, largely the GTA to Chatham because of your competitively priced housing opportunities. We'd expect to see some migration in the 75 plus category, in those that are living in more rural communities that are coming into the primary urban centers of Chatham from either Chatham, Kent proper, or Chatham Kent as a whole, or even beyond. And then the migration within the working age category really comes down to labor force opportunity, and housing opportunity. And those are both really critical. And so if you have jobs and you have housing, you're going to attract people in those age groups. And we are expecting you to see positive migration in those age groups, which is not the trend that we've been seeing in the past. As I showed you in the previous slide, there was out-migration pretty much I would say in most age groups.
Okay, and just one more quick question.
Sure.
I don't know if you can bring up this slide they had on employment land shortfall. Yeah, but, so looking at that employment land shortfall, how does that? How do we address that? How does that? How does the municipality? How do us as council address that shortfall?
So I'll start with that, and Bruce, if you want to jump in. So this is the first phase of the municipal comprehensive review. The second phase of the study is going to look at more specific location options for future expansion. It's going to look at addressing some of the policy issues as well with respect to employment lands and residential lands in the OP. Ultimately, what would be required is an official plan amendment to look at designating additional urban employment lands within a number of those primary urban centers. So it's going to require an expansion of the existing urban boundary within those employment areas, and an official plan amendment to make that happen. And if there's anything else that I've missed, Bruce?
Thank you, Your Worship. As Jamie mentioned, that is kind of the next part of the exercise. I think it's important to keep in mind here as well that this is over 25 years, so we do have quite a bit of supply now. I think Your Worship, Councillor Oche kind of hit on it in terms of the shovel readiness of our supply. That's kind of the key we need to be really looking hard at over the next year or so too. It's one to have a bunch of, a chunk of dirt designated is how shovel ready is it in terms of investment ready. That's and we heard that today. I was up at the ministry meeting with the province. It's a message of things that they're trying to work on at a provincial level as well, and some of the programming that they're working on. So yeah, we do have a long range shortfall, but we do have quite a bit of supply as it stands right now.
Thank you. And just a quick comment as well. I know our committee did endorse the recommendations that's in the report here tonight. So if it's an appropriate time, Mayor Caniff, I'd move the recommendations.
Certainly. Seconded by Councillor Harrigan. Councillor Sakachi, followed by Councillor Solomon.
Just a really quick question here. It's actually for yourself, Stuart. Just because I know Councillor Thompson and Councillor Latimer probably gets asked regularly, has there been any update to our Blenheim Business Park yet in regards to, I guess we can call it industrial land? I don't know if maybe a sanctuary or, I just wanted to see if there's anything that's been brought up in regards to that land.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yes, you're talking about the challenges we've had in the past with species at risk.
Correct, yes.
About 15 acres of land inside of the Blenheim Business Park that's been a no-fly zone for a period of time.
Yes, sir.
My colleagues, John Norton and Bruce McAllister, went to Toronto, met with the Ministry of Environment with our MPP, Rick Nichols, 2 weeks ago. We have been told that we are going to have the full weight and help of the province to be able to move this forward. It's actually a 30, 60, 90-day thing to move forward with and see whether or not we can get some traction on this and finally find some resolution so we can get this property back on the market. Bruce, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, but that's about it, where we're at.
And I guess just one quick comment. Is there something that we can do moving forward to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again? Because that's kind of put up hostage a lot of property that was designed to obviously be something positive for a community. Is there something that we could have done differently there, you feel, that, or is it just kind of just bad luck, so to speak, or is it just have to do with the new regulations and that, permitting the species at risk and all that kind of stuff?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I think hindsight's 20/20. I'll be honest with you, what we run into, I'd never heard of before and whatnot. I think we've tightened up some of the things, the controls internally to ensure that we're getting on our own properties quicker, making sure we maintain a decent grass level as far as the grass cutting frequency and whatnot. I never foreseen this happening, and I never would have thought that we would have had a bird that would have come in and decided to do I guess we should charge rent, but it just come into our field and we couldn't develop, and then we couldn't cut the grass, and then all of a sudden we created an environment where potential for a snake to live. So again, hindsight being 2020, could we have done things different? I sure wish we could have. So.
Anyways, I appreciate that, Stuart, and I appreciate that we've had a couple conversations about that in the past, and I'm thankful for your hard work in getting this up and going, so thank you.
Councillor Solomon?
Thank you, Worship. After having been here a while, most of what you've presented is well presented, but not surprising in the least. We've had planning meetings for 20 years, every other Monday basically, and it's been the consolidation of farm meeting rather than planning meetings. We've been consolidating all the farms in Chatham-Kent into smaller units, economic units, which has then driven a population from those areas into the urban areas, principally the urban area of Chatham, which has had the most housing growth of all the primary urban areas. So it isn't really a surprise what we're seeing up there. We've been living it, or we should have been living it and understanding it every day for 20 years, every week for 20 years. So you can't, that's not a trend that is about to be reversed. That's a trend that is already well underway. The big issue that I got out of all this is the one that I guess we're going to deal with next, and that is the question of industrial lands and the need for more industrial lands. But the real question I hope to hear in the next report is not so much how much industrial land is needed, but where that is to be located. And from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, any one of the three of you, that's really market-driven more than, it's not that we sit here as a body and say, we'd like to have industrial growth in Unga, for example, which is I don't know, I think there's still a coffee shop there in a gas station, but not even there anymore. Okay. Well, we won't be driving it there, apparently. But it's market-driven more than anything else, if I understand it. And so what we have to do as a council, I think, is understand from our advisors where industrial growth should occur if it's being market-driven, and what are the factors that the market looks at. And I don't know if you guys want to comment on that, or you're going to leave that to another day. But you know, I would assume that the market looks at amenities that are available, such as infrastructure, water, gas, but then softer amenities like housing, school locations, hospitals, those kind of things. But isn't the economies of scale that they're looking at a lot of the time to say where I want to put my investment, or where I grow my investment?
Yeah, it's a great question. Through you, Mr. Mayor, it will be a focal point of the next phase of work to look at location options for growth. That work ultimately hasn't been fully scoped in terms of who's going to carry that out, if it's going to be done internally or jointly with Watson and Associates. But I think you're bang on in terms of your assessment. It's market driven. It has a lot to do with location, existing infrastructure, available infrastructure, access to the 401, I think, is critical. Exposure, but those softer amenities are also important as well. So, especially as we move towards a more service-based economy, those more softer factors like access to schools and quality of life and issues like placemaking, making it an attractive place where people want to come to work, walkability, and there's a number of things that could be looked at from a planning and economic criteria perspective. So we're not quite there yet in terms of exactly how that would be scoped out, but definitely would be a critical next step.
Thank you. I look forward to the next phase of addressing those kind of issues and going forward.
Seeing no other questions, I'll add a couple of comments and then we'll proceed with the vote. We have made a lot of strides in the community the last few years. When you look around, the stats show it very much so. We've grown in jobs, we've grown in population. Great thing. And moving forward, I think this is a real rally cry for us all to look and say, do we want to live in a growing community? Do we want to live in a declining community? I personally want to be in a growing community. And I'm really looking forward to the report that the administration is going to bring back to say how we can do that. Because certainly jobs and housing, as Jamie's pointed out, jobs and housing is critical, but as Councillor Solomon alluded to as well, school, public infrastructure, those type of things. We need innovative programs. We need to invest in our community. If we're not investing in our community, why would anybody else? So I think we've been doing a great job so far of looking and investing, but the next step is going to be this report that comes out in the next couple months from administration to say, here's some innovative, creative, great things we can do to grow this community. Because in growing this community, we can provide people here with a much better lifestyle by growing it. So looking forward to the report coming, and we'll put it to vote now. Thanks.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 13B, application for exemption from part lot control, PL 2019-00170, multi-construction, Chatham Inc., Clara Crescent, Community Chatham.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I'd be happy to move the recommendation.
Councillor B. McGregor.
I'll second it.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 13C, application for site plan control, PL 2019-00148, Howells Holdings Limited, 875 Richmond Street, Community Chatham.
Councillor B. McGregor.
I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor Finn.
Happy to second.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0.
Item 13D, municipal insurance renewal 2020. We have a brief presentation by Dave Taylor, Manager, Legal Services.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff and members of council. So there was a report in the package on the insurance renewal. Just a little bit of background. So the municipality's current insurer is Frank Cowan Company and has been since amalgamation. And in fact, Frank Cowan Company was the insurer for a large number of the former communities that make up Chatham-Kent now. In 2015, Legal Services went out for an RFP for insurance, and it covered a 5-year period. And again, Frank Cowan was the successful bidder. So just as a broad overview of where the municipality sees claims and why we need this insurance in place, we provided specific details on claims to council in closed session because those are solicitor-client privilege, litigation privilege. But in a general sense, motor vehicle accidents, sidewalk trip and falls, and sidewalk slip and falls are the main area of claims for the municipality. And also, you would see in the report, the most significant property loss claim for the municipality, which is also covered by our insurance program last year, was the Wallaceburg Arena fire. So the slide now covers a history of premiums for 5 years there, including this 2020 premium. And you can see they have progressed up each year, but normally at a pretty reasonable rate. Last year, I believe, was 4.9%. This year, unfortunately, what we're facing is a 10.2% increase in insurance premiums. So it's very significant. And certainly, we in Legal Services are trying to manage our insurance program in a way to keep premiums down. It includes active claims management to make sure that we're not paying out where we're not legally obligated to. So, this is a particular disappointment to see this type of significant increase.
We went back to our insurance company. We have pushed back firmly on this in order to try to get the number reduced, and ultimately ended up getting to a spot to where the insurance company really gave us some justification as to why this number is there, and it's not really based on Chatham-Kent's loss history. What they told us is it's what's called a hard market, a hard insurance market across the entire insurance industry. I've got Dave Reikley here with me, who's the municipality's insurance broker from PIB Insurance here in Chatham-Kent. And he did a lot of work of doing investigations and pushing back against the insurance company to try to get these numbers reduced. And just as a little bit of background of how insurance works, our insurance company doesn't just insure it all themselves. They actually then sell that insurance, reinsure it to other companies, and ultimately gets to a couple of big players in the insurance industry, Lloyd's of London being the biggest. And ultimately then they're having to take any premium increases they're getting on that reinsurance and push it down to their clients, and that's really what they were telling us is happening here this year. Of course, you might say that sounds like a great sales job, though, from your insurance company. I hope you did a little bit more digging than that, and I can tell you we did. So we've been pounding the pavement trying to figure out, is this actually normative across municipalities in Ontario? And unfortunately, it is looking like it is this year. Just as a couple of examples that are actually out in the news, the city of Hamilton a few months ago renewed, and they faced a 42% increase. Brant County renewed. They originally were facing a 75% increase, changed companies and went back to Frank Cowan Company, and ended up still facing a 35% increase, still very significant. I've got a number of other examples. Some of them I can't really share with you here because they haven't been to their respective councils, but I've been really having phone calls with other municipalities, other staff we know in other municipalities, and we've really been hearing this 10% number, whether it's 8 or 12, it's all around there. It's pretty consistent. So it's disappointing, but what I can kind of tell you is we pushed as hard as we can, and it really got to a point where we were told is kind of a take it and leave it number for the renewal. Just another piece I want to mention with you as well, just a little bit of good news here. So cyber insurance was added to the municipality's insurance portfolio last year on council's approval, recognizing a new area of risk. The premium last year was $44,280. For 2020, we added that pretty quickly, kind of recognizing this was an area of risk, went to council, got approval, and added it quickly on kind of a few applications that we put out. This year we wanted to make sure we were getting the best price, so we put out 12 applications for cyber insurance, really got to everybody we possibly could. And Frank Cowan Company actually ended up bidding at a number that was $37,500, which is an 8.5% reduction. So, a slight mitigation of the total cost, although that's not nearly the kinds of savings you'd need to address that 10.2% in the rest of the insurance, the main body of insurance. So this is the recommendation that is in the report, that municipal insurance, including cyber liability, be awarded to Frank Cowan Company in that amount. And, the second component of that is that we're recommending we go for an RFP. The only really way to test the market to know whether or not the messages that we've been hearing about this increase actually does reflect the market is to go out there, let all the companies there's only a handful of companies that bid on municipal insurance, and we have maybe 4 in the province, but let them get all a bid in. We'll assess them all out, apples to apples kind of comparison, and determine what's the best price. And so that's the recommendation for to do it next year, and it would be for the 2021 calendar year when I'm back here in about a year. Subject to any questions, that's the presentation.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just a couple of quick questions. I think I might understand this. The reason this is in front of council tonight for us to approve the $1.2 million, I thought at first glance if we have a 5-year term, why are we here? Because we've approved it. But was it 3 years was a predetermined cost and then the following 2? That's why we're here today?
So we went out for a 5-year term for the RFP, but the insurance company wouldn't actually guarantee rates for that entire time period. What we got them to agree is that for the first 3 years, they'd go no more than 5%. But each year we were coming back anyways and still getting approval. So they'll really just give us a policy for 3 years or for 1 year, sorry, and then we negotiate each year. They give us a new premium increase. We did manage to get them to lock that down for the first 3 years, but for the last year and now this year, they weren't giving us any sort of guarantee. So they had the ability to increase the premium. But although we went up for an RFP for the 5 years, every year we were actually negotiating and renewing, because an insurance company won't really give you a policy. They might give you 18 months, but they won't give you a 5-year policy because they don't know what their rates are going to be. So it's kind of a weird RFP insofar as It does cover a 5-year period, but we were getting a new rate every year and coming back to council. Now, the benefit is early on we were getting some rates in the 2 and 3% range, and now unfortunately it's at the 10% range.
So I guess that kind of leads into my next question of what's the point of a 5-year RFP? Or is there one? Like, or is it just, you know, it's a nice idea, but it doesn't matter?
So
the sounds of it?
It goes more to the principles of public procurement, which is we do want to do a true apples-to-apples comparison between insurance companies. Now, we could do that every year. We could RFP every year, but it's a tremendous amount of work, and we're worried that the bidders wouldn't keep on bidding back in on it. So, you know, we have the obligation under our purchasing bylaw to go out and do a comparison of bidders and who we're going to go with. And so that was kind of for the 5-year period. But the insurance companies wouldn't have given us a lockdown rate for the full five years,
Right.
so that's why we end up being year to year. So that's kind of the comparison between purchasing in the municipal world of doing the RFP to figure out who you're going to buy from versus the way that the insurance industry would work, which is generally they're giving you 1-year periods.
So with a 5-year RFP, are we obligated to Cowan Insurance? Because you said, you guys tried to negotiate a better premium, but are we obligated through the RFP to stay with that company or not?
No, I think we reserved our ability to get out, and particularly with this type of price increase, we would be, we could go and say that's too high for us, and we're getting out. In our RFPs, we did reserve ourselves a number of privileges to get out. The only practical piece that I would say there is we do have to have insurance in place for January 1. So unfortunately, what ends up happening in this cycle, it's an unfortunate cycle. We get kind of premium increases at the end of the years by the time they kind of give us a number, and then we're actually in a bit of a tough spot to go to another company in that short time period. So that's really why the recommendation is, it's a tough one to swallow, this 10% increase or 10.2%, and let's go out and RFP again. But practically we're going to need insurance for next year, so that's the recommendation.
Right.
There would be another potential is to try to get a short extension from our current insurer for a few months in order for us to get a different, prices from other insurance companies. But my worry there is the per month cost they're going to charge you is probably pretty significant, and you'll lose some of your savings anyways.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. Now, secondly, I think in 2016 we raised our deductible. I remember this, and that lowered our premium, I believe, correct?
That's correct. Yes, we did. We went from $100,000 to $250,000 for general liability insurance.
Right. Now, in the report, you talk about savings. So would you confirm with us that the municipality, do you believe we have actually saved money? Because obviously we're doing a little more work in-house, and that provides for more staff, right?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question that there's internal staff costs. Those staff costs, though, have been offset. We did some business cases on it, more than enough, and actually with some significant savings, just because the staff that we bring in really are doing mostly the litigation lawsuits that was being done externally by other law firms at much higher costs, and what's called adjusting, which is reviewing claims, processing claims, which again was being done previously by external agencies at higher costs. So I'm still comfortable that with the staff there, we're definitely saving versus the previous model. I would also say that we saw very significant savings in that first 2016 year when we moved the $250,000 deductible in our premium there. And then the premiums have jumped up since then, but normally at reasonable rates, a few percent here and there. This is the first time we've seen this really big double-digit rate. So I would still say also that move to the $250,000 premium was worthwhile from a cost savings. I can also add that I think one of the things we'll do in our RFP next year is actually look at different deductible levels as well, and then see whether or not that might be a reasonable savings. Of course, with the deductible, if you go to a higher deductible, you then have to reserve more money. So you got to do a good financial analysis on it, but it's something we'll be looking at anyways to see if we can, affect the bottom line.
Great. And then additionally, this insurance report really got my interest, as you can see. I'm just curious as to, I read that effectively half of the building assets have been valued, and that represents 90% of the value of the buildings in the municipality, but only 51% of the locations. So my question is, why wouldn't we just finish it off if there's, it seems like 10% of the value accounts for 49% of the locations. So what are these? Are these just empty lots that don't almost matter? Because the ratio, 90% of value, for half of the building. So the other half, are they buildings?
So I would say that the municipality holds properties that have some very high value. Like you can imagine, a water treatment plant can be a very expensive piece, right? And then we have a lot of smaller structures, like say a small pump station or a gazebo or something like that, that is actually like another piece of property, another structure, but at the same time has a very low absolute value. So that would be, the general answer I can give you about why we would have a large dollar value covered in only 50% of the buildings, while the other 50%, while not covered, they actually don't represent, a large percentage of the, the structures owned by the municipality. There's other reasons why this hasn't gotten through the entire process. There's a large amount of contents in many of these buildings, so we've got to do a thorough job of it. And part of our insurance company, so Mr. Reichley here has been working on the matter, but also it requires a representative from our insurance company. And scheduling him to be here, we can only get so many days where he's down here. So there's a couple different factors in why we can actually get this done. It's also there's a number of different pieces that are relevant there.
Okay, sure. And then lastly, so we RFP for the company. So for Mr. Reichel, the broker, do we RFP? I don't remember that process, or how does that happen?
We do RFP for broker services. We do that the year after. We did that the year after the RFP for insurance. So what we want to do is we want to have a broker in place to help us with the insurance RFP. And then we'll go back out and do another brokerage. So, following this schedule, Mr. Reichley will help us next year with the our insurance RFP, and then we'll be RFPing for his contract a year later, and he's well aware of that.
Okay, great. That's everything. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just looking at the report, Dave, and no, there's a line in there. The most significant costs of the municipality's insurance company over the last 5 years have been two significant fires. One was the Bridgetown Public Works Garage, and the other one was the Wallaceburg Arena fire. I know there's been a lot of interest, and people have been wondering about the fire in Wallaceburg, and I don't think there was a lot of information that's been released yet about that. But one, related to this, the recommendation and the increase in premium. So a question to you, Dave, is, does this fire at the Wallaceburg Arena, does that relate to some of the increase? And just, I guess I'll add as well, I don't know if maybe Chief Crawford, if you're able to provide a bit of an update from what you're able to about what you can share with the public about the fire and how that, just a bit of an update so we can share that with the public.
Your Worship, maybe I'll get things started and then Mr. Taylor can hop on and clarify my points. I think I maybe give you a higher level view of what takes place when we have such an incident as this. The crews respond to the incident. They go through a series of very orthodox steps in how they resolve the problem. When they get towards the end of the incident, it's known as overhaul. That's when they do the origin and cause and so forth. That all took place. When they notify other agencies to come and assist, for instance, the Ontario Fire Marshal's Office, we kind of step back and assist in that, and they have a sort of a protracted way of doing this. It's quite lengthy. I have not had a copy of the report yet from the Fire Marshal's Office, so I really can't shed any light on any of the details from the fire. I didn't attend. I reviewed the notes from the crews and the officers, and I don't see anything that's unorthodox, but given that it's such a sensitive issue, I probably should just stop there and let Dave take up.
Thank you, Councillor. So it's a bit of a touchy subject talking about cause there. So where we're at in this is that there was a loss. It was covered by insurance, and our insurance company will go and do an origin investigation as well with an engineer. Getting into any more details about the cause is not something we can do in an open session. I'd be happy to talk to council about it in close, just based on the reason that part of the process that you get for insurance is you get your insurance coverage, but then the insurance company gets the ability to bring any claims they want out of that coverage. And so I don't know whether that may or may not happen in the future. And so talking about it in any too much detail, could have some negative impacts there. And so I'm just very cautious to provide any information in an open session about that.
Right on. I appreciate the update. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Solomon?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move the recommendation, and I've got one small question, if I get a second.
Councillor Oche? Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is with respect to paragraph number 2, and it's with respect to the competition in the marketplace. Has Frank Cowan Company recently been purchased by a large insurer?
Yes, that's my understanding, that this year they were purchased by another company. I believe it's Aviva.
Aviva?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Intact.
Oh, well, either one of the largest, yeah. Well, I asked the question on the right day. It's a good thing it wasn't last week we were here. So that's my concern. Even when you go to the marketplace, you're in a pretty small market. In Canada, in Ontario in general, you're in a pretty small market. But I guess that's all we can do is that. But I thought it became even more difficult when Cowan became part of a much larger, tighter group. So, okay, that's all I had to ask.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 14, Community Human Services.
Item 14A, request for service manager consent, Clearview Housing Cooperative, Inc., financing a mortgage for the new build.
Councillor Solomon?
It's moved.
Councillor Foss?
I'll second that.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
14B, request for service manager consent, Corporal Henry Minor, VC, Ontario 185, Senior Citizens Corporation loan to Villeneuve Community Corporation.
Councillor Latimer?
Be pleased to move that.
Councillor Thompson?
It's seconded.
Any questions? I will put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 15, Infrastructure and Engineering Services.
Item 15A, Chatham-Kent Fire and Emergency Services Fleet Rationalization.
Councillor Foss?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Crew? Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 15B, motion by Councillor Bondi regarding traffic lights.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I, Councillor Michael Bondi, move that staff review all traffic lights in the municipality to ensure effective traffic flow, and that all pedestrian signals be properly synced with traffic lights, and that staff complete this project and report back to council by April 2020.
His second for that, Councillor Finn.
Happy to second.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I know this doesn't really require motion, but I sent this request in about 3 months ago and I didn't hear anything, so here I am. And the reason I brought it forward is, like, I personally walk a lot, and I find that the pedestrian signals don't work. It's as simple as that. You'll have a green light for cars, and you'll have the do not walk sign on not one, but on a lot of these pedestrian signals. But I was informed by email about an hour before the meeting started tonight that if one does not push the button to ask for the light to change, it won't change. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, if I walk up to a light and I'm waiting for it to turn, wouldn't the indicator tell me? Well, why not? I just don't understand why it continues to have a do not walk sign when, like, if I'm standing there, I don't feel obligated to push the please hurry up and change the light button. And again, I've only known about this for 3 hours, so.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Typically, the traffic signal needs
that input from the pedestrian to let it know to service the walk. The alternative is to have the traffic signal just cycle, and we do have some signals that are like that, but
Yes, you
they're
do.
considered very inefficient. For example, on Grand Avenue, at Victoria Avenue, you have a lot more traffic on Grand Avenue, so the goal is to get more green time on Grand Avenue and minimize delays on Grand Avenue, and then when there is traffic on Victoria, we have sensors in the road that can detect vehicles. That lets the traffic signal controller know that it's got to put a green call onto Victoria. But for pedestrians, we don't have any type of signal or sensor other than the push button. So in that particular location, you need to press the push button in order to tell the signal that it needs to change and provide a walk indication to cross Grand Avenue.
But what I don't understand is why they're not synced, because you're never going to get a pedestrian signal that's not the same as the vehicle signal every single time. Like, you're never going to get a you can walk indicator, but allowing traffic to come through, like, because many of them are synced, right? Like, say, I know the ones, I walk the same places every time. Many of them do work, but why wouldn't they all not just work together? Because if I'm standing waiting for, I'm looking at the pedestrian indicator, which is what I'm supposed to do as a pedestrian, and it doesn't change, but yet the light for the vehicles does change. So wouldn't it make sense that they cycle together? Like, I do understand, like Victoria and Grand, which is one of the places I walk in front of every day, the light won't change unless there's a vehicle on the road, right? Because you want to keep the through traffic going on Grand Avenue, not on Victoria. And
that's correct.
So I used to drive a motorcycle and it wouldn't trip it, so it was very frustrating. But
that's a different issue.
Yeah, that is a different. Yeah. That'll be 2 weeks from now, Mark. But I guess what I'm getting at is, if I push the indicator to ask for a change of lighting because I'm a pedestrian and there are no vehicles, it's going to happen anyway, right? Like, the light will change. It'll accommodate me to cross the road with or without a vehicle on the weigh scale thing.
That's correct.
So if a car comes along and weighs the indicator, therefore causing a change in signals, wouldn't it make sense that the pedestrian signal would just change with it? Like, I don't see the benefit when you say it's inefficient for it to do that. Where's the inefficiency? For the lights to just simply add up. I know I'm making a lot of noise about this, but again, it just kind of blew me away that half of them work and half of them don't. But
So, thank you, Mayor Caniff. The reason why the pedestrian signals doesn't come up at the same time as the vehicle green is because the timings for a pedestrian signal are longer, and and this is kind of a area of confusion for a lot of pedestrians. We only program roughly around 8 seconds of walk time, and that walk time is, under the Highway Traffic Act, the time when a pedestrian can legally enter the roadway onto the crosswalk and begin to cross. So that 8 seconds is usually not enough time to cross the roadway, and we're aware of that. But the next indication for the pedestrians is the flashing orange hand, and that is the indication that we program enough time for a pedestrian to walk from one side of the road to the other. And we do that by going out and measuring the crosswalk, and then we take that distance and we divide it by a walking speed of approximately usually 1.2 meters per second, which is an average walking speed for a pedestrian. And then we get a time, and that time is usually, like for instance, Grand Avenue, that's probably around 13 seconds, 15 seconds. I don't know the exact time, but that time is the time needed for a pedestrian to get from one side of the road to the other. And it's perfectly legal for that pedestrian to be on the road during that flashing orange hand. It's just that if a pedestrian comes up during that flashing orange hand, they're not legally allowed to enter the roadway. So altogether, the pedestrian times are longer, and so if that pedestrian timings were coming up every time a vehicle came up, that would add more red time to Grand Avenue, and that would make the traffic signal less efficient. Because typically, if there's one vehicle that pulls up on Victoria Avenue, we program 10 seconds green time minimum. And then there's about 4.1 seconds yellow time, and then 2 seconds red time, and then it's back to green on Grand Avenue. So we're looking at about 14, 16 seconds of total time. Now, the pedestrian time can be longer than that. And so it's all about efficiencies on making the traffic signal operate efficient, not just for vehicles, but for pedestrians as well.
Okay, so I get it. If a pedestrian tricks the light, there's a timing factor there. What I still don't understand, though, is when the pedestrian signal and the vehicle signal just can't sync together. That's what I don't get, which you're not going to answer me because you're trying to, but I'm just not agreeing, frankly. But I understand the timing. I get that. If it's a single pedestrian, you account for so many seconds for that pedestrian to get across the roadway, which allows for the green to remain on the main thoroughfare, but the signals don't sync together. I just find it's confusing for people when they walk up and they see, a yellow, amber light, and they stand there and they wait for that indicator to tell them it's a green walk, and it just stays don't walk the entire time.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mayor Canaff. So the traffic controller itself, like the cabinet and the wiring, is not even designed to accept a signal from the vehicle sensor and apply that to a pedestrian. So the whole system is designed around pedestrian-only type actuation, so the PED buttons will apply a walk to the intersection. The
so
vehicle
the ones that do work,
I can't even get this vehicle sensor to place that call that you're asking for. You have to press the push button.
So if I could suggest, Mayor Caniff, that we've had these type of discussions with residents before, and we try to handle it. And with this type of description, what I'd like to suggest is that we'll issue a media release, because there's obviously confusion out there. The logic that Mark is describing is best practices. It's used in all municipalities, and it's based on the concept that we're always trying to create the highest level of efficiency in the intersection. So I don't know if if that would be helpful. That's an action we can take from here, and I think it might help clear up a lot of the concerns. As far as the overall review of the traffic signals, we review every single traffic signal within Chatham-Kent twice a year. So we're doing that work already. As issues occur, we also create ACRs, or active citizen requests, and we immediately go out and look at the system as well. So we weren't sure with respect to the motion if it was talking about a higher standard, and the answer is that higher standard absolutely exists. The technology we're using is we're upgrading it as things fail. Usually the life is around 10 to 15 years. So we weren't sure about that. If you want, we can come back, and there's plenty of money we could spend on creating an extremely efficient system. As of right now, we are managing to our budget, which is our operating budget and our life cycle budget. So that's the level of service we're providing is based on the budget.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I don't find it's very efficient to leave me standing there for 20 minutes waiting for a light to tell me I can walk. But again, I was only informed 3 hours ago that you have to hit the button in order to get the signal, which still I don't think is the right way to do it, but there's that. Now, part two, because I would pull the motion because you've explained everything, but part one was to review the traffic lights in the municipality to ensure effective traffic flow. And by that, I meant, for instance, if you're traveling southbound on LaCroix, there's no left-hand turn at King, which I think somebody told me was to accommodate for shift changes at Navistar years ago, because the flow, if somebody wanted to take a left, it would tighten things up. For instance, there's no, again, left off King Street, heading, I guess it would be northbound on 3rd, or sorry, north, no left.
Southbound, no left, if you're going west.
Yeah, well, there's only one, or left, it's left hand. So those are just things I thought maybe we could review and look at that while I was bringing this motion forward. I don't know if those, they may make sense, but the left onto 3rd from King, I know people just ignore and just do it anyway. And there's a policeman agreeing with me, so that tells you something. So those things I thought would just be part of the overall motion just for a general review. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Finn?
Just one question. If the buttons, how often are they checked to see if they are functioning? I know when a new light goes up, they put the ones that actually make the sound. There's quite a few in this city that still have the old button, of which a vast majority don't work.
So, thank you, Mayor Caniff. So twice a year we go out and we do preventative maintenance on our traffic signals, and all of the vehicle detection and pedestrian detection equipment is checked during that inspection. And yes, we do have some older style push buttons that don't make the beep sound, and we are slowly replacing those. So if an older style button is reported as failed, then we replace it with the new style button that beeps and lights, so it gives the pedestrian a indication that a call's been placed to the controller. Now, all our new traffic signals under accessibility regulations today, we have to install the audible pedestrian systems, and so all our new signals have that new audible PED button that provides both the beep and the light indicator, and it also provides message information, and also a tactile vibration for those that need that.
Well, if somebody could check the ones on the east side of Raleigh Street at Richmond, it hasn't worked for over a year.
We can do that.
Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment that recently Mark and I had a conversation about a pedestrian feedback in Wheatley, and I felt like you were quite responsive and were able to explain not just to me but also to the pedestrian around the traffic signals, so I really appreciated that. I don't know if we need to do this. I feel like if we're testing every pedestrian crosswalk lighting system twice a year, plus responding, if you're responding in the way that you responded to myself and this citizen from Wheatley, then it was a great level of service. So I don't want to make work in these areas, because I know next week we'll be talking about a significant amount of work that engineering has to do regarding other areas. So I just wanted to comment that, not that I don't think, Councillor Bondi, that this is important. I think there's obviously some challenges at the lights that you were facing, but maybe those are individually dealt with rather than making you go through all of the municipality to look at crosswalks, because I also say that when I'm crossing the street to go from Foodland to the library, it seems to work really well in Tilbury. There's only a handful of crosswalks in Tilbury, so that's my limited experience there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to
Sorry, I just want to, Councillor Bondi, do you want to continue with this?
No, that's what. Yeah,
okay,
thank
do you want to
Mayor.
pull it? Okay.
Yeah, and the reason I'm pulling it, again, is I only found out about this stuff like 3 hours ago, right? So, we probably could have avoided the whole thing. But in any event, now that it's all been explained, I guess it's unnecessary. I still disagree with the lights not syncing, for the record, okay? But I'll leave it there so we can move on to 16. Thank you.
Relating to the item was just pulled. Is this it's okay? You can tell them offline on that. On item 16, Finance, Budget, and Information Technology Services.
Item 16A, Reserve Housekeeping.
Councillor B. McGregor.
I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Foss.
I'll second the recommendation.
Any questions? Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't know who's going to, Gord? Okay. I have very few questions, but I just want to make sure I understand the process. So council passed a motion that said that we could create an $18.5 million reserve for purposes of a multi-sports complex. But the condition was, in order to use that, we had to get grant funding from the province and feds, right? And is that, I got it right so far? Because it's a little more complicated than just that.
Correct.
And that's correct. So the administration then filed that grant request for about $36 million. And the 18.5, of course, is conditional upon receiving that money. So the first step in the grant process, as I understood it, was for the province to then recommend and forward something to the feds. Have I got that right, too?
That's correct.
Okay. So if the province doesn't forward that to the feds, that ends it. Am I correct in that? That ends the grants.
For the current application period, yes.
Okay. And the current application period is what? 2020?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So we would know in February 2020 whether the province has forwarded the grant application, the grant forward, what do they have to forward to the feds?
From what we've heard from the province, we should hear by February, sometime
Okay.
February.
So if they don't forward it, we'll know it by February, and that ends any grants for the grant period. If they do forward it, when do we know whether the feds approve a grant?
The indication is about between 2 and 4 months, so projecting sometime in May
Okay, 2020?
2020.
Okay. So could it be that the province forwards an amount, let's say we ask for 36, it's a little over 36 million, and the province says a different number. I don't know, pull a number out of the air. We'll give you 6 million. And they send that recommendation on to the feds. Can that happen? I mean, I guess they can come up with a number different than ours.
That potentially could happen, but we have no knowledge whether.
If I could add, we had a discussion with the province directly on that question.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer they gave us was that if we did that to everybody, we may not have any projects, right? Because if they're only going to give us 6 million of 36, now we're short 30 million. So giving us 6 million may mean nothing.
That's exactly what my next question was.
So the answer we got from the province was that that's probably not going to happen. When you get whatever funding you're asking for, up to a maximum of 36, that's what you're going to get, and that's what they're going to approve.
Okay, so that was my question. So if they approve something $5 million, that's as good as saying zero. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
And that ends the grant process for 2020, and that means that you're not proceeding with a multi-sports complex in accordance with the resolution passed by council, unless you have another grant period another year, and you go on, correct?
Correct. We would bring this back to council, though, that we applied for 36, we've got 10, and it would be up to council to say, we're not interested, or, we make other provisions.
Yeah, I would expect you to bring it back to council as soon as we know, because I think I've already brought a motion on that you'll be bringing something back next week with numbers, and you'll be telling us quarterly what's going on. But what I'm trying to understand is we don't use that $18.5 million until we know the outcome of the grant process in any event, correct?
That's correct.
So why are we doing this? So it comes down to trying to understand the process, and then I ask, well, then why are we doing this now? Is it because if we don't, is it so we don't utilize the reserves in the budget? And they're still there for 18 million? 18.5 million?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. It's simply housekeeping. In both the May motions and the October motions dealing with the arena, we could have dealt those nights with what reserves that the money would have came from. It wasn't done. This is just housekeeping that you have asked for 18.5 million to be set aside in case we get the grants. This is our recommendation of where that 18.5 million comes from. We had the discussion at EMT about these amounts, and we're all comfortable with these amounts going to this reserve. if we didn't do this, you'd be faced at budget time, for example, if not knowing whether you could spend $8 million out of that first reserve on another purpose or not. So we'll have updated figures for you at budget of what's remaining after that, this 18.5 million set aside for you to use at budget time.
Right. So I was correct then in my question that asked, are we doing this now so that we don't utilize these numbers in the budget? So they're sort of frozen, so we can't dig into them on the budget.
Correct, because you committed 18.5 million out of reserves, but you didn't commit what reserves they were from. So this is just specifying where we're recommending they come from.
Just trying to understand it all, and also to help other councillors who have asked those kind of questions and really want to understand it too. So my last question is really on the second page. It says Community Investment Reserve Fund, and maybe I should know this, but it says source explanation. So what I'm wondering is, it says accumulated surpluses from slot revenues, landfill host fees, Integris dividends, and interest. Are those 100% of the slot revenues, landfill host fees, Integris dividends, and interest that go into the Community Investment Reserve? Or does some of it actually go, as I've thought for years, to the bottom line of our budget?
Thank you. These are the surpluses above the budgeted amount that have been adding up over the last few years in this reserve. A good example is the Gateway Casino for 2019. We debated at last year's budget about whether to increase the budget for 2019, but not knowing exactly when they were going to open, we decided not to. There likely will be approximately $500,000 surplus in 2019 going into this Community Investment Reserve Fund, just from the fact that Gateway Casinos opened in mid-July, and we gained 5.5 months of increased revenues than we did at the Dresden.
Yeah, yeah, and so back to my question, I've been under the assumption that revenues that come from these slot revenues, which is now casino revenue, landfill host fees, and in some of the Integris dividends and interest actually go into the budget as a revenue to the bottom line. Am I still correct that that's the case?
Yes, approximately $6.5 million.
Good, because I was counting on that casino money to make up for some increases that appear to be projected. So, okay, you've answered my questions very well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor C. McGregor, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Thank you, and through the mayor. Two questions, actually, and one is just in follow-up to for understanding from Councillor Solomons' remarks. Even though these are being transferred over to these different reserve funds and such, it is still at the whim of council during the budget session. Should they choose to take some monies from these reserves to put them somewhere else and all of council votes in favor of it, we can move these at any point in time. Or not at any point in time, but during our budget cycle, providing all of council is in favor of moving it. Correct?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. At the budget meetings or any Monday night? Any Monday,
That's right.
Monday council.
Okay. So I just wanted to clear that up, though. Even though it's there, it's not locked. It's where it needs to go for this project, but it's not locked. So that was just one thing I wanted to point out. The second one is the new life cycle reserves to be created, RVG, Fire, Police, and Public Works. Are these life cycle reserves, are they being established with a zero fund, or are you taking a percentage from the other life cycles from these departments, or is this something you're going to ask us to put towards creating these new ones at budget time?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So these are 4 areas that have been identified by staff that need funding that's not in place at the current time. For example, the first one, RVG equipment. If you just take, for example, the kitchen equipment was put in 2004 when the building was built. We have life cycles for the buildings for when the roof needs repaired, to HVAC systems and things like that, but we do not have a budget specifically for the life cycle, other than RVG will have a small equipment fix-it in their operational accounts. So we'll be evaluating everyone's operational accounts, coming back with a report detailing what the annual requirements are, what of existing operational accounts can be harvested that will be transferred to the life cycle, and what the gap is, and what we should look at future years for funding.
Thank you. So I'm going to take that as a little bit of both.
And I should, a little bit of both, and I should also add that every 5 years we do a major update to the asset management plan. So it's our 2017 asset management plan. There'll be a wholesome review of all requirements of all categories for 2022.
Thank you, Gord.
Councillor Latimer.
Thank you. My question has been asked and answered.
Councillor Pinsino.
Thank you, Worship. I think this is putting the cart ahead of the horse. I'd like to see the reserves just stay where they are until we hear from the upper levels of government. We may not even need to create this account, so I'm not going to support it. Thanks.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
Motion passes 10-6. 11-6.
Item 16B, 2019 one-time federal gas tax allocation.
Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor C. McGregor.
I'd be happy to second it.
Okay, questions? Councillor C. McGregor.
The only question I have, it seems to make great sense to put it towards the budget to address road projects. Is this what we've used the gas tax fund for in the past? I thought we had other areas that we were allowed to use it, such as community transportation, etc. This is limiting it to road projects. So I'm just curious as what we've done in the past.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So in the past, for the federal gas tax, we've dedicated 75% to bridges and 25% to roads. And that's the only areas that we've allocated to. There is options to use it for different projects, but really it ends up being a shift of dollars, one or the other. It's a recommendation to put this towards the roads project, 100% of this one-time money, because of the large deficit of upcoming projects that will be presented at the January 13th council meeting when the capital budget's presented.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 17, corporate services.
Number 17A, Municipal Modernization Program.
Councillor Harrigan.
I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor Crew.
Second.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 17B, motion by Councillor Oche regarding bed and breakfast.
Councillor Oche.
Thank you, Your Worship. I, Mark Trey, move that we look at London's bed and breakfast bylaw of $165 initial fee plus $171 fire inspection fee and a renewal fee of $55. Adding to this, a fire inspection being needed every 5 years, $171, or the cost to cover Chatham-Kent's expenses to bring a report back January 13th, 2020.
Councillor Harrigan.
I'll second the motion.
Any, Councillor Oche.
Yes, I'd just like. Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to bring us up to some of the smaller municipalities around us. There's many that do not charge anything at all, do not have a really a bylaw for for bed and breakfast. So I definitely would like this to go through and to bring us close to the municipalities around us, and they are also fighting B&Bs, which are paying nothing at all and not being inspected at all. So it's not so much, and I'm not being rude to Chatham here, but the major Chatham, the city of Chatham, has many hotels in that are small communities such as Wheatley and Tilbury, Ridgetown. I'm not sure about Bothwell as far as B&Bs, but we just don't have a hotel, motel at all. So it's nice to have these bed and breakfast in our area, and I definitely don't want to price them out of business. So, like I say, as they fight the B&Bs, we definitely need to help our bed and breakfast out. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm just with the wording, and I'm a little off tonight. Would this cover our costs? Would the 165 initial fee and 171 cover our costs?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As they're proposed in the motion before us, no, they would not. Back a few years ago, as Nancy's reported in a previous report to council that came last month, it was explained that we did a service review, and it was council approved at that time that we be cost recovery. In addition, at the time of the service review, fire services had indicated that their priority is where people sleep, accommodations such as that. So that is why it was brought forward that bed and breakfast fell under this, and they were included in that service review. And the costs that were brought forward, we did a implementation over a year where we only charged 80%, and then as council's direction the following year, we brought it up to 100%. So as they are right now is cost recovery, this motion would not be.
If Councillor Oche wanted to address it, without turning the floor, I'd hear what he has to say.
Your Worship, if I could.
Sure, Councillor Oche.
Actually, I asked Nancy, and she said yes, this 171 would, because it's every 5 years that we're going to have a inspection. She said the 171 did cover the cost of that, so I'm not really sure what isn't covering the cost. Maybe.
Sorry, to clarify, the every 5 years, if it was directed that council wanted it only to go in, we'd have to check with fire services, as if they continued to have to go in every year, it wouldn't be cost recovery. If it could be a sign off that we'd have to investigate, as London does, where they sign a self checklist to say that it's been done, then this could possibly be. But if fire services still has to go in because that's theirs, it's up to council's direction.
Yeah, this is meant to be one every 5 years, similar to what London does, just so that they can stay in competition with Airbnbs, because many people don't realize how many we have here, but we have quite a few that rent out their house for people to stay at. So, and they're definitely not being checked at all for anything. So that's meant to be once every 5 years, Mr. or Councillor Thompson.
Can we even do that? I think the fire chief wanted to make a comment.
Mr. Mayor, maybe I can make two comments. One, I'm very unsure about the legality of whether or not we can just arbitrarily say every 5 years, but we can take a look at that and come back and let you know whether or not it's required. I think it's required for an annual inspection right now. I know our hotels are. The second piece around this is that council sets a level of service, and you have already set the level of service that we respond to complaints and requests to do inspections. So we could find ourselves in the position of going to a B&B, doing an inspection, and billing them.
So this is all as clear as mud to me at this point. I'm in favor of getting more information. That doesn't bother me by any stretch. I don't like the idea of pushing fees that we have at a cost recovery back onto the taxpayer. I'm sympathetic to the B&Bs specifically, but we have a lot of fees and sort of costs that we do across all sorts of business. And I don't want to think people to think I'm not business friendly, but I mean, at some point, you've got to realize that the bed and breakfast industry has changed, and we can't really subsidize a system that time has left behind. So I'll support this tonight, but again, I'm not in favor of anything less than full cost recovery. Thanks.
Councillor Pincinel.
Thank you, Worship. First of all, I'd be interested in hearing the legalities of this, as the chief was just explaining. My concern is the 5 years. Honestly, when you offer sleeping quarters to the public, you have to make sure that standards are maintained. And I'm not so sure every 5 years, and I'm sure there's lots of good ones out there, but there's probably lots out there too that aren't going to maintain their property to the proper standards. And the 5 years, that's concerning for me as well. Now, I realize we want to make it affordable for the B&B owners, and like I say, most of them are good, responsible people, but all you need is that one, and then, tragedy strikes, and I think everybody has egg on their face. Thanks.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor, I think I have my answer question. I was a little. It's the wording of the motion about looking at London and bringing back a report. It doesn't really identify what is to be in the report, and I think I might have already heard a lot of information already that's going to be coming in that report just through our discussion. So I was a little confused if this was actually an amended bylaw coming back to us or strictly a report as to what our fees are compared to London's, is what the intent of the motion was. I was just a little confused on what we were actually asking for here.
Councillor Orchie, you want to clarify that?
Certainly, Your Worship. What it is to bring back a report to see if we could do what London is doing at the moment. I'm not sure, as Chief Crawford said, if it's legal or not. I mean, London's doing it. There's a lot of places right around us now that do nothing at all. They have no fire inspection. They have no even licensing fee to be a Airbnb, or not Airbnb, sorry, just a regular bed and breakfast. So I'm not sure how they're legally getting away with it, unless that's just a law we have here, but in Chatham-Kent, but I'm not sure. And London being a fairly large city, I would think they would have to follow the same rules as us. So.
Okay, so then we're looking for a report on legalese and comparator on our costing from it to come back. And at that point, if we decide to move forward, then we would look to redirect for a bylaw amendment.
That's correct.
Correct? Okay,
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I have to agree with Chief Bob here and Councillor Pincinel. As a firefighter and being a former firefighter, 5 years is a long time between fire inspections. Thank you.
Councillor Scotchy.
Through your worship, everything I was going to mention has been mentioned by Councillor McGregor.
Councillor Harrigan.
Hi, just a couple of comments. Back in October on the 21st, we received quite a bit of information, and I think a lot of the feedback that has been going on is because, or that Councillor Ochi has been bringing to the table from my perspective, is that perhaps we haven't gotten all the information in one kind of cohesive report, so to speak. I was just looking back on the report from October 21st that references if a rental like an Airbnb, cottage, or house with 5 or more bedrooms, that requires a rental dwelling unit large municipal business license. Does that mean that somebody who owns an Airbnb and is just renting out like a room does not require any kind of business license? Or if a bed and breakfast decides that they're not going to be a bed and breakfast anymore and just rent out 2 of their bedrooms, like what's that definitive boundary there? Because I also wonder maybe if there's a misunderstanding on the definitions that businesses and community members are working within.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, the Airbnbs that have, or any rental that has 5 or more bedrooms, are required to have a license according to the definition that was brought forward to council probably a couple years on the rooming houses. And if it is less than 5, they do not require a license. When we talk about Airbnbs, of course, it all comes down to definitions, but an Airbnb could have one room and it could be a year rental, no different than an apartment or a house that somebody might have for rent for a family. So when that was all being discussed by council, we had identified the different definitions. So as it stands now, anything over 5 bedrooms is required to have the inspections and is required to have a business license.
And then in terms of cost recovery, as we look towards eliminating red tape and maybe having more digital, and I don't own any business license or B&Bs or anything, so I don't know, but as we make more digital applications for renewals, will that drive our costs down? And therefore, then would our licensing be able to reflect that in the future?
So in the service review, when the matrix came forward to council to show the breakdown of cost recovery, there are several columns within how we come up with the cost. So there are fire inspections, there are health inspections, there is potentially police inspections, zoning's required, and then there's a licensing admin cost. So perhaps in what you're speaking about eventually going electronically in that, it may minimize the amount of time administratively that licensing has to spend on it, perhaps zoning. But ultimately, at the end of the day, a fire inspector, a health inspector has to go to the locations to do the inspection, and that's ultimately what those costs are for those types of inspections. So there could be some type of reduction when we get through the red tape and the electronic forms and all of that, but ultimately at the end of the day we still require a body to go out and complete the hour inspection, half-hour inspection, whatever it takes them.
Okay. So I'll support Councillor Ochier's motion because I think it's very clear that there's more information that is being asked for by council to administration, and perhaps some email conversations can take place in between now and January 13th to make sure that everything that is being looked for is received by council so that we can make a decision to move forward.
Councillor Foss?
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess my question is this an isolated case where we've had a complaint, or is this a broad request from all the bed and breakfasts in the area?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have had a complaint. They saw what Leamington was paying and what we are paying, and in Wheatley, you have one that's in Leamington, you have one that's in Chatham-Kent. So the one across the road is paying a lot more than the one on the other side of the road. Tilbury as well, obviously. We have approximately 10 of the bed and breakfast in Chatham-Kent, and so I've heard from 2 of the 10, and they're both in my ward. So.
And I guess that scares me a little bit, because if we make changes because of 2 bed and breakfasts, we're going to have to change all of them. But then there's going to be another business that's going to say, well, I'm paying more than my neighbor in Lambton or Essex as well. So then we're going to be dealing with that as well. In my opinion, we passed the motion a while ago that we want to be cost recovery. I know it can't satisfy everybody, but in my opinion, changing the rules for 2 bed and breakfasts, where the other ones haven't been finding a problem, seems a little bit over the top for me, so I won't be supporting it.
Councillor Oche, any last remarks?
Yes, please. Thank you. So I guess this would be similar to all our arenas outside in every country, in every little rural area, because that's exactly what we heard. People were complaining about the price being too high right next to an arena that's in a different community, which isn't Chatham-Kent. And we definitely fixed that this year, which I thank our management for doing that. But this is a report. This isn't anything in concrete saying, yeah, we have to follow this. It is cost recovery because I am asking for the same bylaw that London uses, where it's a inspection every 5 years. But they do have paperwork to fill out themselves as far as the the 4 years that they are not being inspected. And I guess, as you said, I am asking for a report, because somehow other places can do it. Some don't even have to have a license period to be a bed and breakfast, let alone pay for any fire inspection or health inspections. They don't need them. So, like I say, I'm just asking for a report. I'm not asking for this to be done in concrete until we see what we come back, see if it's even legal. Maybe London doesn't know, and maybe some other places do not realize that you have to have a fire inspection every year. I'm not really sure, but that's what I'm trying to find out. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 12-6.
Item 18, closed session reports.
Thank you, and through the mayor, I would move that council move the motion that we pass the closed session report on Monday, December 22nd. Council directed administration on proposed acquisition of lands by the municipality or local board and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with regard to surplus St. Clair Catholic School Board properties, Section 2392 C and F of the Municipal Act, and proposed disposition of land by the municipality or local board and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with regard to WDC Rail, Section 2392 C and F of the Municipal Act, and council received information on litigation or potential litigation and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with regard to year-end litigation report, Section 2392 E and F of the Municipal Act.
Councillor Finn. We voted. We electronic vote. All right, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Item 19, approval of communication items. Councillor Bondi.
I'd be happy to move the item.
Seconded by Councillor Oche. Any questions? Good questions, okay. Councillor Harrigan.
Item 2D regarding the Cannabis Host Community Network. I just wanted to comment that perhaps just given the prevalence of the cannabis industry in Chatham-Kent, it may be worth us participating in this host community network just to understand what other municipalities are going through and to be a leader community in terms of the direction that is set from a municipal standpoint.
Okay. Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Ditto.
Okay. Okay, seeing no other questions, all in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two things, actually. One is I'm just wondering where we're at as far as if anyone got a hold of, this would be to Judy. She's kind of busy right at the moment by the looks of it.
Judy.
Judy's.
Sorry, I was
That's
answering
okay.
another question.
Yep, no problem at all. Do you know where we're at as far as the trail naming for Mr. Bowman?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Do you know where we're at as far as the trail naming for Mr. Bowman, if anyone's gotten a hold of him yet?
Oh, yes. So Meredith has been working on the connections for that, and I think she is, aiming to move forward for the January meeting to bring it back to council.
And I just want to confirm, on my part, I've asked some people to step up in Wheatley and get some names. What they kind of did was more of a petition, and we've got hundreds of names on it, so I'm not sure will that work instead of letters.
Okay, so I'm just getting a message here from Meredith because she's here and she's waiting for some information from him, but the application form has been sent.
Okay. To Graham.
Yep.
Is that correct? Okay. All right. And then secondly, I'd just like to thank some of the councillors and the mayor for coming out Friday night to the Tilbury Parade. which was probably one of the biggest we've ever had. Crowd-wise, I believe was the biggest we've ever had from what I'm being told. And then for coming back to Memorial Park, where we actually lit the park up with, as I said before, over 30,000 lights. And it is on it's on now until July 11th, and the lights come on at 5:30, or January 11th, well, not quite July, sorry, January. Sorry about that. So January 11th, and lights come on 5:30 to 11 every night of the week. On the next 3 Fridays as well, the kids can meet Santa from 6 to 8 at the park itself as well. Thank you.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor, I'm just wondering if for our next meeting, if somebody could just give a brief report, and I'm happy to ask again at non-agenda if that's the time, on the status of the United Way campaign. I haven't received I was hoping to do payroll deduction this time, but I haven't received any information as of today, so I'm just wondering if we can get an update on where the campaign status of that within the municipality.
Councillor Pincinel.
Thank you, Worship. I'd like to send kudos out to the Boomtown players in Bothwell. They had another successful run on their last production. Money's going to local charities. The Children's Village here in Chatham, Fire Department, Firemen's Association, Dresden Splash Pad. They did an awesome job, and I think that these charities are going to benefit from it. And Friday night coming is the parade in Bothwell, so that should be a good one.
Excellent. I just want to see anything else. Councillor Finn.
I didn't get a chance to make the Saturday morning breakfast with Santa, but I heard it was a hit. I wanted to say thank you to Tammy and Brent Ripley, who threw one heck of a dinner on Sunday.
Excellent. So I just want to draw everybody's attention to the brochure that you had tonight, Home for the Holidays. This is kind of a year one thing of a Chatham-Kent initiative to celebrate the holidays and reflect everything that's going on across our community. There's so many amazing things going on. This brochure is a first kick at the can as far as all the things going on, so I'd encourage the public who are listening, you can get these brochures at any of the libraries or other public buildings, as well as there's online. So I encourage you to look at that because it gives you a lot of opportunity. We're going to be adding to that. There's a lot of new things happening in the community. As Councillor Oche pointed out, for the first time, they did a lighting in Tilbury. Dresden, they went and bought new lights. Downtown Chatham, they've got a whole bunch of new lights. The armories are going to be doing some things. Behind the Civic Center here, there's things going on. So I'd encourage the public to get out and look at what's going on. There's a ton of things. And that's it. A reading of the bylaw. Councillor Solomon. Councillor Finn, seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Third and final reading. Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Foss. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 22, resolution of council in closed session and adjournment.
Thank you. And through the mayor, I would move that Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Monday, December 9th, 2019, and that Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act.
Second by Councillor McGrail. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Done.